afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Propaganda and Master of Propagandacast Lehrs. Because we'll be talking about something a bit more specific today. We're going to be talking about the metagame and how it impacts on you, essentially, roughly. And of course, for those wondering, what is the metagame? The metagame is, it's sort of like kind of unspoken agreement, sort of on a massive level, on what's good and what's bad. Obviously, not everyone's going to agree on it and so on, but it's sort of kind of like that. It's, a sort of rough strategic idea, sort of everyone kind of agrees on, and sort of what works, what unit works, what build orders work, what commanders work, and sort of what is the best to play on. It's not something that has been specifically ratified or anything. It means, again, heavy cavalry is good, use it a lot, go for rangers, go for this unit, go for this unit, skip tier 3, for example, go for that, go for captains first, rush, if it ever happens for heavy panzer, go for example again, it sort of can be considered meta game if enough do it. And sort of do it without thinking about it too much. That's also the specific thing about the meta game. It's sort of not something to think about too much in sort of game terms. It's just sort of an agreement, if you will, sort of strategically, that this is what makes sense. And, you also have the sort of sense, throughout war as well, your units had to be this and this size, and so on, for example. So in that sense, the metagame is sort of something there that's, you suppose you can call it a good rough guideline on what people are going to play at in the, that specific moment, that specific time. And again, you're always lost. You can sort of look to the metagame and perhaps at least lean up towards it, to sort of figure out your next step. But at the same time, it is also something you follow slavishly. It means you're quite predictable because, well, you're rather relying on something perhaps others thought out without necessarily putting into your own much thought or input there, meaning you're actually going to be quite vulnerable. For example, I like to sort of, hit the meta games and a lot of its sweet spots. For example, if it's involved, for example, going straight for calling armor, I'll go for a lot of medium armor because then can usually hurt them before they can bring in their calling tanks because, again, usually it means they've got no clue and no nothing to do until they bring up the heavy armor. And that sense, that's a weakness of the meta game. So when it comes to the meta game, you can consider it a bit like a dumb beast. Really big, really powerful, but also really slow, not necessarily good to react, but again, what if it hits, it hurts a lot. But if you can dodge it, you can usually, deliver some good blows and bring it down pretty quickly. And obviously, you also then got players who just sort of play by their own rules, like Red Wings again, they usually sort of describe going, off the meta because, they're not playing by that agreement, They'll go for a lot of other units, which again, most people have written off. And the thing is, and here's also the important bit, the meta game does not necessarily actually work off the fact. It's very much about perception. I mean, at one point, the metagame was all about grenadier spam, at a point when grenadier spam was actually not very effective, and it relied a lot on mechanized assault to then bring up the Stugi as a crutch, and even then, it did not perform what I'd describe as frightfully well. And similarly, again, the whole is just, losing a lot of momentum just to bring up a calling heavy tank, again, also indicates, that the meta game is not exactly the brightest thing to go for at all times. I mean, again, if you're not sure what to do, the meta game can be sort of something to stick on, to rely on, to perhaps emulate in some senses. But ultimately, it can only get you so far unless you're really, really good, in which case it can occasionally get you a lot farther. And though if you're really, really good, you're usually one of those who tend to then dictate the metagame, because again, the metagame to some extent also then follows, the higher ranking players, usually one that stands out the most, like Jove or Barton or Price or Helping Hands, all those players. I mean, there's obviously a lot more players, but I'm just using them because those are the ones, the names I can remember names of right now. You also got Fortune, for example. Those are sort of the ones that, so, to a certain extent, dictate the metagame, not necessarily directly, but again, most people then look to them and say, alright, that kind of works. I'll go for it as well because, if that works, I kind of want to win too. And if they're doing it, I must be able to do it as well. Though again, if you're sort of then known as not playing by the meta like Red Wings, you're usually not going to catch on that much either unless you pull off something really, really impressive. Which again, Red Wings can do, but even then doesn't necessarily catch on. So, I mean, that's also the thing to keep in mind about the meta game. Not to let yourself be intimidated by it because, again, it can look really impressive. But again, if you keep in mind that it's to a certain extent rather driven by blind faith and belief at times. I mean, if you can sort of understand what works behind it, you can usually counter it. So I mean, from my perspective, the metagame is just sort of looking like, all right, this is what I generally have to expect. I can sort of play around and deal with it that way, and of course, we'll try to stick to my own play style, which is actually, the play style is something I'll probably be covering in another Propagandacast Lehr in the near future. How to adopt your own, how to find it, how to utilize it the most. How to perhaps have more than one play style ready. But generally, I mean, if you just stick too much to the metagame, you also risk not really having a playstyle and sort of developing as a player that way. I mean, that's also one of the dangers of just relying on the metagame too much. It's kind of like learning carpentry just through, like building IKEA chairs, for example, or learning to cook simply through, microwaving stuff. You're not going to learn an awful lot there eventually. Even you just sort of stick to food that sort of just requires minimum preparation. There's a limit to how much you can learn there in the end. I mean, obviously, again, it's going to be nice at certain times, particularly just sort of starting out there, sort of get an idea what you want to do and so on there. But eventually, you're going to learn how to cook from your own, from the bottom up to sort of really, get a decent hand at cooking. Though, of course, for some, it's going to be, fast food all the way. Fair enough. But, I'd rather, try to encourage this channel towards, cooking from the bottom up, finding your own recipes, your own strategies, rather than sticking to the IKEA manual approach. Or the, I don't know, Dr. Pasta, whatever they call that stuff, wherever you're living, stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere there's a brand called Dr. Pasta. So if you can keep those things in mind, when playing a particular newer player, again, it's sort of a guideline, sort of, beacon. You can sort of generally play for it again, sort of start, get into the game so you can focus more on learning how to control your units. But then as you get more experienced, you rather sort of reverse the roles. You're not relying on it. You're trying to fight it. You're trying to find a way out. You're trying to, exploit its weaknesses, because the meta game will generally always have its weaknesses. And if it's not got a weakness, that usually means something's broken in terms of balance, or at least not working very well. So that's also a little mind there to keep in mind as well. There's usually some other issue, for example, like another stuff not working. But again, many times there will be instances where basically just people have for some reason decided this unit is bad. Though the reality might be it's actually good if you know how to use it, and then it might just be average if you just handle it competently. So there are some details sort of to keep in mind there, sort of as a rule of thumb. But if again you can't keep all of these things in mind again as you sort of either getting better at the game or learning to get good at the game, I mean, I think you'll find yourself improving. I mean, initially again, it's not a bad thing to just look at the metagame. It's just there to help you get better. You can sort of focus on the more important things like, managing tactics, flanking, and so on there. And then you should get better. You can sort of begin finding your own play style, your own strategy, and begin work towards, fighting the metagame. So that's rather something there to keep in mind. And overall, if you can do that, I think you will, again, as a new player, improve yourself reasonably well. But ultimately, again, at some point, you got to take off the training wheels, if you will, and sort of begin working towards your own stuff and learning how to paddle on bicycles or whatever it is you're doing, or learn to walk on your own two legs, if you will. Stop crawling, walk. As an experienced player who can sort of think out your own stuff, and even then you can still sort of look to the metagame occasionally if there's a problem, like, how do these solve it, and then maybe you try and find out your own solution. They can sort of emulate it, or I suppose just go for it completely until you figure out what to do otherwise. So yeah, this has been a brief-ish video here on the metagame and, the player. Hopefully it's been educational. Hopefully it's given you some thoughts on the metagame. I'm not entirely sure how to approach it, but a part of me really wanted to try it because, again, it is something there that sort of gets talked about a lot, but never really directly in terms of, how it relates to the player, sort of at different stages of, learning the game, if you will. So, keep that in mind. Hopefully, again, try to, initially if you're getting into the game, you use it as sort of a crutch, sort of a mold, but ultimately you got to step beyond it and learn to, the craft yourself. Ultimately, we've also got the basics down. If you can do that overall, I think, again, you will, reasonably improve and, get to a better place. Besides, also watching the Propagandacast and learning how, good players and, for example, how myself do it. So if you like this video, subscribe, like it, share it, talk about it with your friends, family, not your enemies, possibly. Share them something else, something, terrible, like not this channel, some other entirely channel different. And of course, just comment, provide feedback, and so on. Again, I mean, if this hasn't been tough, again, I'm sorry, but again, I just want to try and approach, I want to try and approach some of these more bit more broader topics. If you're also trying to get something out there that might again help players. But if it was helpful, please let me know. Since I'd like to know if I sort of hit some kind of mark with this video. Again, this is a bit more experimental for me, but you gotta push for some boundaries. Try and explore new elements and breach new waters. So again, if you did like it, found it useful, subscribe, like, share, and of course let me know in the comments. But this is Imperial Dane signing off, and see you all another time for another exciting Propagandacast Lehr. Cheers, everybody.